So check it out. What's it all about? You didn't know I could drop rhymes, did you? Got a new microphone, playing around with it. Okay. Welcome to the Railsplitter Woodshop. And what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be talking about grain orientation. Hold on, let me go get my notes. I'm going to be talking about grain orientation in wood. I'm going to be talking about face grain, edge grain, and end grain. And then I'm going to talk about some common mistakes that we find just with sometimes processing the lumber, what processing the lumber is. And then I think I'm going to make a separate video on processing lumber. Basically, just taking a rough sawn stock that we get from the lumber yard and then squaring it up with the planer and the joiner here. So I'm going to take you through a couple of those steps in a separate video. And then, yeah, I think that's what we're going to do. So really, I'm just going to kind of show you a few basic things and we'll get going. So I want to show you, this is where we bring all of our lumber in. We order it from a place up near Chicago. They come down about once a week, and so what I do is I'll order twice a year. I try and do one in the fall, and then depending on how much lumber we have, one in the spring. So comes in through here, and a lot of times what we do is we'll cut it down. We used to stack this way, and it was just so inefficient. So a couple years ago, we built this lumber rack here, and now we cut these down to about 7 foot. Usually they're 12 to 14 foot when they come here, so we cut them in half and then we stack them in here. So we have poplar, we have maple, we have cherry, we have white oak, red oak, and then finally down here, walnut. So one of the first things that I've been trying to help my students understand is that we are always looking at grain orientation and grain direction. A common mistake that gets made here in the shop is that, let's say somebody needs a board that's 4 inches long. Well, a lot of the times what they'll try and do is they'll try and take maybe something that's like 6 inches wide, and they'll try and make this cut right here. And they'll try and just cut it, and then thinking, well, now all I have to do is cut it down to there. The problem that we have here is we are cross-grained. Our grain structure is this way, and we cut it 90 degrees. We cut it perpendicular to our grain structure. This is going to be weak, and this will not hold up. If we want to make that cut, we need to cut with the grain this way. Okay? So the 3 types of grain that I'm going to point out, what we call face grain, which is here. I'm writing upside down and backwards. So we have face grain. Now we have edge grain. And then we have end grain. End grain. Maybe better shown this way on this end. This end was cut. Okay? One more time. Face grain, edge grain, and end grain. The best way that I can try and describe grain orientation is think of it as that you're holding a bundle of straws in your hand, like a bundle of drinking straws. And as you're holding those straws, you can look down into the straws. That's your end grain. And if we understand grain orientation and we understand face grain, edge grain, and end grain, then we can use those grains to our advantage in different applications in woodworking. And it also will help us make better cuts, make stronger projects, make better joinery, and all of these things will kind of start to fall into place. So this is one of the first things that we need to really learn about wood and wood structure. So back to our bundle of straw analogy. If I'm holding a bundle of straws, I can hold it in my hand and I can look at the edge. I can look into the sides of them, and but the structure and the strength in that straw is at the length. So if I cross cut, I can still look back down the end grain. So if that makes sense. So now I'm going to take you over to a couple of logs that we have here in the shop to show you how to think about wood as it is milled and cut out of a log. So let's take a look at this wood here. So you can see the rings of the log are obviously in this direction. And real quick, this is called your heartwood and this is called your sapwood. Okay? Heartwood, sapwood. And what we are looking for is, as you can see the way this piece is dried out, here in the center, this is called your pith. This is the pith of the log. And this is normally a pretty weak spot and pretty prone to cracking. You can also see where this cracks along these lines, so you have to think and consider those things as we look. So going back to this board here, although these are not the same species, look at where this board came out of. You can see your end grain, and let's look at that grain structure. Well, it was probably cut out of something right about in here, okay, for example. And now look at the grain structure and look at the grain orientation of the end grain. So this is exactly what you're looking at. So as we continue to look, let's take a look at, if we were to slice this log here, we would see our face grain. And as we look down into the rings, we're looking at edge grain this way. So I hope that clarifies a little bit. So the final thing that I'm going to show today, here's a stack of some poplar boards that I brought down. And I want to discuss processing the wood as we take it through the planer and the joiner. This wood has been milled and kiln dried, but it is not ready for a final project yet. Okay, you can go to a lumber yard and you can get all four sides cut and sanded, but you're going to pay for that. So basically you're paying somebody else to square a board up and to straighten a board up. Here we have the capability with a really nice planer and a really nice joiner. We have the ability to do those things on our own. So we can buy the lumber cheaper and then use our tools to get all four sides nice, clean, and square. So before we start our projects, we need to get to 4 clean sides. So I'm going to point out a couple of things that we're looking for to help us get there. Okay, so one of the first things that we can do is always inspect for any metal or anything that could potentially be stuck in the wood. So normally we're not really going to get a lot of nails or screws, but you do want to keep those things in mind when we're milling. A couple years ago, we did find a bullet casing, we found a bullet that was lodged in, and one of my students had actually cut through it on a bandsaw, which that would be normal if somebody went out shooting out in the woods and then that thing gets lodged. So the next thing that we're going to look at are any big, ugly knots, cracks, or bark that is still on. And here's a good example. If you look at this edge of the board, you can look at this bark. This was the very edge of the tree out to the bark, and you can see that that's going to be a weak spot. So you're going to have to compensate, and get this part out of your project. You don't want to use this because this is going to be weak. Okay. The next thing I'm looking for are any cracks or knots. Now this is all poplar. It is not common, especially to find a lot of knots. We can find some cracks. I know I found one in one of these boards yesterday as I was looking at them. Let's see if I can find it. Oh, I do see it. Here it is. Okay, so this wood has been kiln dried, meaning that it's basically put into a kiln and dried down to a good moisture content. The nice thing about that is that once that moisture content is out of the wood, it's not going to move nearly as much as wet wood would. Well, that's kind of a tongue twister. But let's take a look here. Okay, you can see a crack right here in the last couple of inches of this board. That's common. On the end of the board, it is common to see some cracking. So if I were to just come here and cut right in here, I'm going to zoom you in, and I were just to cut right at the edge of that crack. The problem is that crack probably goes a little past this point. Maybe I can't even see it yet. But as I cut this here, if I didn't cut all that crack out, it's just going to continue to crack. So what I want to do is I want to come in several inches and make sure that when I make this cut here, I'm getting that crack, even at part of the checking or whatever, I get those things out of there. So the next thing I'm going to look at is, do I have any bowing? Do I have any cupping? Do I have a crown? And if I look down this board, see how maybe you can see that this board does have a crown. This is probably the biggest crown of any of these boards that I grabbed, but you can see the crown. So what I want to think about is when I run this through the joiner, I want to start on this side because my crown is going, my crown is going this way. Okay, so I want to cut off these parts to straighten out the bottom, and then from there I want to cut this side off on a table saw. I want to plane up and down. You can see this board's got a little bit of a wave to it. Okay, as you eye down it, you can see a little bit of that. So that's where I would use the planer. So on my next video, I'm going to talk about processing wood just as it is here. Okay. So as you look here, look at the end grain. What part of the tree do you think it came from? Can you visualize that? Can you visualize that the pith would have been up here, and these are the rings wrapping around that? Okay, same with this one. Rings are going this way. And as you'll also start to see that as the board dries and when we use it, it's going to follow the rings. It's going to follow, this board will want to cup. So I hope you got a lot out of the video today, and I hope grain orientation makes a little bit more sense. I hope the microphone helped out a little bit. Leave a comment down below and let me know if the microphone is helping. I'm trying to get better with technology. We're now using GoPros to record. I've been using my phone up until like 2 or 3 months ago. So we're using GoPros to record. I have a microphone now that I'm going to try and use, and hopefully that will help with the audio. If you have any comments, please leave them below. Let me know what you're thinking of the videos. I would like to continue to add and have this be a part of a series that we're using that my students can use here in the shop. Until then, enjoy your holidays, and everybody have a great new year.